All right, guys. So if you are here for our monthly cohort training about SNAP employment and training, eligibility, screening, and referral, you're in the right place. If you're not, feel free to stay and hang out. Our good friends from SJI and CEO will be presenting today, so I'll introduce them in a second. This is just a brief overview of what we'll be going over today. So welcoming everyone, we'll do a little bit of a reflection from last training. We'll do a quick review of our content last year. Sorry, my computer is telling me it's about to restart. Oh dear. Okay, just kidding. And then we'll dive into participants. We'll start with eligibility, enrollment. We'll then follow that up with referral and policy. And then, of course, our what's to come next month and things to keep in mind between now and then. I would like to introduce our good friends, Dina and Aaron, from our two partners, Seattle Jobs Initiative and Center for Employment Opportunities. They're our lovely presenters today. And so now we're going to do a little bit of reflection for folks. So make sure you have your fingers warmed up. Riley put this together, so thank you, Riley. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you understand both the opportunities and challenges for your organization related to E&T. Got a thumbs up? Thumbs downs are okay. You're not going to be docked if that's true for you. How are we feeling? Middle of the road, maybe? All right. How about I feel good about our alignment with E&T and its key components from last session. Okay, got a few more. Good, good, good. Perfect. I like to see it. And then how about I'm aware of the next steps we need to take to become an E&T provider? Got a couple of responses. Okay, I'll take that as folks don't know, possibly, which is fine because we're not through the cohort yet, but you will. Thanks for playing along with me. I am going to turn it over to our TA team to take it away.
All right, thanks, Samantha. Hi, everybody. Dina Rader here from SJI. And I'm going to start us off a little bit of a review from our last webinar and some of the things that we learned the last time we were together. And so you may remember a couple of these slides are a little bit of repeat, but just as a reminder, we learned about what SNAP and Employment and Training was, and that it's a federally funded workforce training program to help recipients gain economic independence. And as an employment and training program or provider, that you also receive reimbursement when you provide eligible employment and training job readiness training type programs. And this slide really just shows you the structure of how E&T is delivered. And again, with the reimbursement, it's an opportunity for you as a third-party provider to leverage your existing work and then receive reimbursement for eligible expenses. And then next, we learned about the services part. So you may remember we had a bit of an activity around the service mapping tool. And during that time, we learned about components, what those components are. Those are the activities that a participant in employment and training can engage in that for eligible engagement, which includes job retention. We also want to remind you to make sure to always check your state plan for details around these things, because the state does have a lot of flexibility in what this looks like. We also learned about case management, how important that is to have that integrated into the work, employment and training work that you're doing, as well as reimbursement. we call it supportive services. You may also hear us talk about it as participant reimbursement. But this is where the support services or wraparound services that you currently provide to help support someone in their employment journey. And we also gave you a homework piece about, working that services mapping tool and sort of learning about how your current services align with employment and training. So hopefully most of you have engaged in that. And if not, we can certainly talk about that more in your individual TA. Okay, so next, I think you may remember this Venn diagram. You're going to see it a lot. We use it as sort of a reflection of this whole sort of feasibility study that you're on in this Appalachia cohort. And it's really assessing how your social enterprise or maybe your community action agency services and operations really aligns with employment and training. And being aligned in all four of those blue circles is important, but more importantly, overly important is maintaining those areas within your state context, as well as your state priorities and strategies. And being aligned in all of these areas, now all 5 areas, really sort of serves as providing the sort of foundation to becoming a very strong third-party provider.
Thanks, Dina. I see, Leroy, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Hey, I can't see like everyone that joins once past a certain number unless I scroll. So welcome. Glad to see you were able to hop on. Folks in West Virginia, I think you may be familiar with Leroy. Leroy's just here to observe how we deliver this E&T content to you all and interactions and see what questions come up as a support and resource. So for folks in West Virginia, our good friend Leroy is here. Thanks for joining. All right, back to you.
All right. Yes, welcome, Leroy. Okay, so now we're going to dive into SNAP employment training participants. So it's important to really understand sort of fundamentally who is eligible for employment and training. So in order to be eligible for employment and training, a participant or a person must be on SNAP benefits or food benefits in the month that they're receiving services or within an activity or a component in employment and training. The one exception to this is job retention, and job retention really sort of comes in on the back end after a participant has gone through an activity, employment and training eligible activity. They've gone through, their job readiness and they found work. Job retention sort of comes in on the back end to support them while they're newly employed, and oftentimes can then be taken off of SNAP because they have employment or increased income, and so they're removed from SNAP. So that's the one sort of caveat there, that you can still continue to provide job retention even though they're not on SNAP. But prior to that, in order for someone to be eligible, they have to be on food benefits in order to be eligible for the employment training portion of SNAP. Secondly, a person cannot also be on TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, while they're on SNAP. They're therefore ineligible for employment and training if they are on cash assistance or TANF. And that is the real reason for that is because TANF has its own workforce program, and so it's really sort of considered double dipping. So they can't be on the cash assistance through the state. And then lastly, able to work upon completion of the program. So I explained job retention. You can still continue to support them once they've found work up to 90 days. But after completing those component activities, they need to be able to work. upon completion of those activities. All right. So next step really is identifying your participants, right? And the process of identifying the participants. And so as a provider, you really want to understand who you're serving and whether they're eligible for SNAP or food benefits, as well as not being on TANF or cash assistance from the state, therefore are potentially eligible for employment and training. So the way that you go through these steps really is probably looking very familiar to what you're already doing. You're asking your program participants if they're on food benefits, if they're on cash assistance, or any other sort of form of assistance. This could be part of your intake process, some level of your orientation when you're talking to people, or through your case management time with folks. And then utilizing any relevant information around any other supports that they may be receiving, whether that's through your agency or somewhere through another partner agency in your area. You want to identify their employment status, what does their household look like, and really sort of overall assessing whether they're perhaps eligible for food benefits. And if they appear to be eligible for food benefits and then have identified that they're not receiving those benefits, then encouraging them to apply. And you can make a choice. It's your choice or option to help them, support them in making application in those initial steps. Another key thing that you can actually take advantage of if there are SNAP outreach providers in your area, that's a really convenient way to get someone enrolled in the food benefits in your state. I also want to add to that last slide, if you are helping support someone to get enrolled in SNAP who is currently not on the food benefits, that time that you spend with that person helping them enroll in food benefits is not a reimbursable expense. Okay, so let's go on to enrollment. Yeah. So enrollment really looks like a two-step process. So when you're meeting with your participant and you're identifying, whether they're on SNAP or not on SNAP, there's really two steps to this, and they're really separate processes. So the first step really is about enrolling in SNAP. So, you're talking to folks and you're explaining, if you're not on food benefits, and you've identified their household information, any other support that they're receiving, that quite possibly they're eligible for SNAP or food benefits in your state. And what does that provide? It provides actual, access to food. And then this enrollment really sort of is about filling out the application, supporting them in filling out the application. They then would probably end up talking to an eligibility worker, some kind of level of interview, and then bringing some documentation to that interview. The next step really is to refer to the employment and training portion of SNAP, and really explaining to folks what comes along with those food benefits is the employment and training program. A lot of people don't know this, and so helping them understand that it will help support their employment journey, their job training journey, while they're on SNAP or food benefits. And then after verifying that the participant is on SNAP, then your organization will have some responsibility in identifying whether those participants are eligible each month. All right, so we'll go on to the referral process. So there are two types of referrals. As you can see here on this slide, there's a direct referral and a reverse referral. And this might seem a little confusing, so and that's okay, because we'll talk about this more as we get into this, but so that you kind of have a good perspective of how this works. So a direct referral is that person's point of entry really is with the SNAP agency, whether that's at the state or the county. Their point of entry is with that eligibility worker. And they'll go through a process of screening, they'll verify eligibility, and then enroll them in the SNAP employment and training program. And then at that point, because they're with the state SNAP agency or the county, that referral comes from them to then a third-party provider, which of course could be yourself. And it comes to you as a direct referral. And then at that point, you're assessing whether that person who has been referred to you is a good fit for the kinds of services that you're providing through employment and training. The second type of referral is reverse referral. And this point of entry is where this person is sitting in front of you. This could be someone new who just came into your agency. It could be someone that's currently participating in some level of engagement in activity through your agency services that you've identified that potentially either is on SNAP or potentially eligible for SNAP, and you're determining that in your office, right? Instead of this person going back to the state, you're doing it first. You're doing some level of assessment. And through that assessment, you've identified that they either are on SNAP or potentially eligible for SNAP. So that's what is an eligibility referral back to the SNAP state agency or the county. And then that process happens then with the eligibility worker where they're going through that interview, that eligibility verification process, and then they come back to your agency enrolled in the SNAP employment and training program.
Any questions?
Any questions? Yes.
We got a little quiet today. That's okay.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how reverse referrals work, and you can see it in this graphic here. And I want to kind of sort of point to the three arrows over here to the right. I'll get to that in just a second, but this is where your participant is sitting in front of you. They're seeking some level of job training, or they're seeking some job readiness support. And then your frontline staff who are doing the intake or perhaps even the orientation, they're going through some level of assessment to verify, make a decision if this person is a good fit, not only to the services that you're providing in your agency, but potentially as a SNAP employment and training participant. And thinking about those eligibility requirements, again, we're considering whether that person is currently on SNAP. They're not receiving any kind of cash assistance from the state or TANF. They're able to work upon completion of your program. And then if you have any other sort of agency, unique agency requirements that they need to fulfill through eligibility purposes. And then there's really three sort of scenarios how this works. So as you're engaging with that person that's sitting at your desk or is maybe it's a new person that just came into your agency, or it's someone that's currently in your activities in your agency, you're asking them questions about, are you receiving food benefits? Also asking them if they're on TANF. Okay, so you verified that they're on SNAP but not receiving any sort of cash assistance. Then you would make that referral again back to the state SNAP agency or county for that engagement with the eligibility worker for eligibility purposes and verification. There's another scenario where perhaps they're not on SNAP, but you've also identified them as probably being eligible for SNAP from what you know around SNAP requirements and eligibility. You can encourage then that person to apply for food benefits. And then once they've been approved, they've gone through that process and they're now on SNAP, then getting them back to the eligibility worker to get them enrolled in the employment and training program. Now, potentially all of that would happen at the same time. And hopefully there wouldn't be two different visits to the eligibility worker, that once the eligibility worker enrolls them in the food benefit program, then also that participant is talking to them about engaging in employment training. And then that also happens during that sit-down session. And then thirdly, we have not on SNAP and not eligible for employment and training, and which could also include somebody, they perhaps may be eligible for food benefits, but they're like, yeah, no, I'm not going to engage with that at this time. And so it would just be like any other intake that you would be providing to someone who is, fresh, crossing your threshold, or is currently engaging in your activity. So you would just continue to serve them as you normally would, with the good work that you provide, as you do. And but they just wouldn't be eligible for any employment and training at that point. Okay. So if we think about how these processes work, we've talked to you a bit about how this employment training program is like a layover of services to the great work that you're already doing. So you're embedding these tasks into your work. So as a provider, you'll embed these tasks, and that are tasks like, determining participant eligibility through your intake or assessment process, through your case management process. And so these are some examples, thinking about screening for food benefits, and then the employment and training. And it's optional. If you find that someone is not on food benefits, but you suspect that they're eligible, then you support them to enroll in food benefits. And again, as I had mentioned earlier in a previous slide, that when you're assisting someone and supporting someone to enroll in food benefits, that's not an eligible reimbursable activity. Now, once they get enrolled in employment and training, at that point, food benefits and then employment and training, then everything that you do thereafter with that person is, as long as it meets eligibility for employment and training, can be reimbursable expense. Secondly, you'll have some communication with your SNAP state agency or county, and that's around talking to them around verification of food benefits, and then enrollment into the employment and training program. And then, providing an employment and training orientation, right? Folks need to understand that being on food benefits, there comes along all of these ancillary services. And so explaining to them how they're eligible for that and what you can provide to help support them along their employment journey. And then any kind of, ongoing SNAP employment and training eligibility verification is a responsibility of your agency once you become a third-party provider. And what that looks like is, verifying from month to month that a person is still enrolled in food benefits in your state, and in the employment and training program. Therefore, they can continue to engage in the employment and training services that you're providing. When I left off one other thing, obviously an assessment. You're doing some level of assessment, perhaps through your orientation or through your intake, so that you know that this person is really solid and willing to engage in an employment and training journey. Okay, next.
I was just gonna say, any questions about any of the buckets on this slide? Okay, if there's a pop quiz at the end, just kidding. We don't do that. All right, we'll keep on going.
All right, thanks, Samantha. So next, I really just want to talk a bit about communicating with your SNAP, whether it's your state agency, your county, or an intermediary. You'll be communicating with them, right from the very beginning, once a person gets enrolled in employment and training. And it could look a variety of ways. And so we have a couple examples on this slide. You could be engaging with the state or county through some kind of data system, a shared data system that you have access to, and are engaging in taking case notes in that data system. You can go in and perhaps determine whether a person do the verification of whether a person is still on food benefits from month to month. There's quite a bit of ways in which states utilize sort of a shared data system. On the other hand, it could be something like sharing a shared spreadsheet where it's like an enrollment roster, and you're responsible for listing out all of the activities that a person is enrolled in from month to month, and you're submitting that back to the agency for employment and training, food benefits enrollment from month to month. It could also maybe require your case notes to be in there, or it could be required that your case notes are being taken, in a case management system that's internal to your agency. And then it could then be a combination of both, whether you could be inputting some of that information into a shared data system and then also submitting some kind of a roster spreadsheet back to your state SNAP agency or county. Any questions about that? Okay, we wanted to touch a bit about work requirements, and it does affect SNAP and SNAP employment and training eligibility. And with this, it's important to know that there have been some recent changes to work requirements as a result of HR1, or the Big Beautiful Bill. And the impact of that on third-party providers. Many third-party providers are being asked to take on more direct referrals and enroll folks who are considered ABODs, which are able-bodied adults without dependents, and enroll them in employment and training. And the great thing about employment and training is that it's a really good fit for those who are considered ABODs. And part of the work requirement for ABODs is that they're meeting an 80-hour-a-month benchmark. And so employment and training is a really good fit in helping them meet those benchmarks. So if we start in this first box here on the left, who is considered an ABOD, the definitions have changed with the age range. It used to be 18 through, what was it, 55? And they've now increased it to age range of 65 to be engaged in those 80 hours a month. There are some exemptions. There are some exemptions that went away, and those exemptions previously looked like folks that were aging out of foster care, or who were veterans, or who were homeless were considered exempt, and that those exemptions no longer exist. But there are still exemptions, and we have some examples here, whether it's a mental or physical barrier to work is an exemption, perhaps being pregnant or living with a child under the age of 14 are an exemption. And in order to meet the ABOD requirement as an ABOD, that screening is done by eligibility workers at your SNAP state agency or county or intermediary before they even hit your doorstep. So those folks will know whether they fall into the ABOD category or not. And that screening is done at the initial application for food benefits, as well as recertification time. And so the important part here, I think, for third-party providers is to know with this particular population is supporting them to understand when it is that they have to provide some level of documentation about their 80 hours a month. And that will be generally at their recertification time. And the reason why is because sort of the consequences of not meeting those hours is pretty strict. So again, what is required of ABODs? It's meeting the 80 hours a month benchmark. They have to be in some kind of a work or work-like activity to be meeting those 80 hours a month. And then those 80 hours a month could look like a combination of work, actual work, and a work training program that all add up to 80 hours a month. And then again, I'd mentioned that the consequences of not meeting those 80 hours are pretty strict. And so if an ABOD fails to meet those work requirements or those 80 hours a month benchmark, for any 3 months in a 3-year period, they can lose their benefits. So it's quite strict. And so supporting this population in knowing when and what they need to provide as far as documentation back to the SNAP state agency or county is really important. And it kind of some of it falls back on the third party provider, especially if you are an employment and training provider. So understanding the basic work requirements is really important. So that you know how and what should happen for a participant to stay in compliance, and then supporting them in meeting those requirements. And so at the bottom here, you can see that there's a link where RedF, actually Samantha, has done a really great job in pulling together a briefing that really describes and helps you understand those work requirements. So clicking that link will take you right to that briefing, and it's quite good. I highly recommend checking it out. The other thing to remember is that states have some flexibility in what some of the exemptions look like or how they're applying other things related to the work requirements for ABODs. So it's important for you to understand your state's work requirement compliance in your state. Does anybody have any questions?
That was a lot.
It was.
All right, we'll keep it going.
All right. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to the other half of our TA team, Aaron at CEO.
Hey, Dina, thanks so much. And also, like, ABODs is such, like, what Samantha said, it's a very heavy content related topic. And honestly, we could probably talk an entire hour on all things ABOD related and how it affects, like, the SNAP E&T participant, how it affects the program, but for having you have that context on how ABODs affect eligibility is really important for you to know, because not every person who is receiving SNAP is eligible for SNAP E&T. So a prime example is, like, if you do have a person who has a disability that it prevents them from being able to work, that eligibility worker is not going to approve them for a referral to SNAP E&T as an example, because obviously if they're going to go through an employment training program, but they're not going to work, then that doesn't really make sense. So that's why that process exists. So also want to thank Dina for, like, really having the lion's share of this presentation. So she did all the heavy lifting there. So I appreciate that. And I kind of have the easy part on this section. So great. So what we thought we would do is kind of walk you through that process as it relates to a participant's journey within, say, CEO's model. Since we are running a social enterprise SNAP E&T process for all the 12 states that we operate in. So I wanted to share with you just kind of like what that looks like if you were to operate, like how we operate that process. So it's again a two-step process. From the moment that they come in, we do what's called an initial assessment on day one of what we call P2E. So we call that our pathways to employment, and that is an opportunity for us to do two things all at once. One is to orient that participant coming into our door to our program, what the requirements of that program is, how it works, how long the program is. And so that's considered the orientation. And so as a SNAP E&T provider, you're going to be responsible for doing a similar process where you're orienting that participant to your program and letting them know what all the requirements are. Because you want to be able to identify upfront whether or not that participant, one, is a good fit for your program, but also whether they can meet the requirements of your program to complete it. If they don't, if you identify that they don't, then if it is a, say, direct referral from the county they've sent that SNAP participant to you, you have to then basically what's considered to be like a provider determination to send that participant back to say, hey, they're not a good fit for our program and this is why. And then that way that county eligibility worker can reassess and screen and see, well, maybe there's an E&T program elsewhere that's appropriate, that's more appropriate for what they're trying to do, or maybe E&T really isn't a good fit for them. So we do that initial assessment up front so that we can orient that participant to that. And then also, because we have so many people who are coming to us through referrals outside of the SNAP E&T unit. So as an example, we serve justice impacted individuals. We receive a lot of traffic coming from Department of Corrections or Department of Probations. And so a lot of people are just coming to us and on that day one of orientation, if we haven't already acquired through our intake process, when we're calling them and we're scheduling them to come into that orientation, if we haven't already acquired that SNAP E&T benefit status, that's where we would do that here. So we'll find out if they're receiving SNAP or not. And then that's where this second step comes in, to where we're identifying that SNAP status. And they're either already receiving SNAP or they're not. And if they're already receiving SNAP, then that's great. We need to, if it's a direct referral, we already know that. The county's already sent that person to us, right? So we know that that person's receiving SNAP and they've been referred to E&T. If they're not, it's a walk-in person or it's been referred through us through another agency, we find out they're SNAP. Well, we still need to get that reverse referral from the eligibility team of the SNAP E&T unit. So what we do is we send a reverse referral to that eligibility staff member in the county or however the SNAP E&T program works in that state. Sometimes they have a centralized system for it. We send that off to them and then they come back and tell us, yep, this person's good to go. They're receiving SNAP and they've been screened and deemed eligible for your program. And so they give you that authorization so you can start serving them in your component. So that's that right side of it. If they're not already receiving SNAP, then that's when you're going to see if you want to help them in obtaining those SNAP benefits. For our population, it makes sense that a lot of our people are coming straight out of incarceration. And so it's a critical piece for them to have that food security and also having that stability to help them get back on their feet. So we always are advocating for that, but also obviously because we're running an employment and training program that's partly funded by SNAP, it helps facilitate that as well. So it's kind of a win-win there. So we will help our participants coming in the door if they're not already receiving SNAP to determine if they're eligible. We don't make that determination, but we assess whether or not they want to apply for SNAP, and we will assist them with that process. And then an eligibility worker will process that application, and the process proceeds from there. Once we've got them on SNAP E&T because they've applied and they were approved, then we can either submit that direct reverse referral at that point, or during that eligibility process where they're getting screened for the SNAP, they might say, hey, I'm already working with the CEO. Can you make sure I get a referral for that? So, but typically we just do the reverse referral because it's easier to muck that process up. So any questions about that first step, about how they come in, they get oriented, we determine whether they're on SNAP or not, and then submit that reverse referral. Okay, I think we can move on to the next one. So now we're into the step 2. And so this looks a little wonky. So basically where we're picking up where we left off is that at that DHS confirms E&T eligibility. So that's the Department of Human Services or Department of Health and Human Services, whatever your state agency that's going to be doing that, or at the county. And so they're going to, when you submit that reverse referral to them, they're going to look at that participant. They're going to make sure that they were screened. They're going to check that ABOD status to make sure that they're able to participate. And then as long as they have had that screening and they've been deemed a good fit for SNAP E&T, they will approve that reverse referral and send it to you. And once you have that, then you can begin providing those services within the component that you're offering. And so that's when you can start billing for your case management, for program delivery, for participant supports. All of that stuff occurs once you receive that reverse referral. There is a process too for when you're doing that orientation. So if you orient somebody prior to their SNAP approval, depending on the state's policy, you might be able to also include that time once you get that reverse referral, but you do have to get that reverse referral approved before you can consider that time being spent as being billable. So just want to throw that out there. If you get rejected, so for whatever reason, you send that reverse referral in, and let's say they had a pending SNAP application, it wasn't approved yet. That could be a possible reason, or they were assessed and they didn't meet the criteria for employment and training. So then that eligibility worker is going to send your reverse referral back to you and state that they've not been approved. And you might want to take a peek at that. Most of the time, so in CEO's example, the reason why the reverse referral gets sent back to us as not approved is because that participant has actually, their benefits have expired and they're no longer receiving. They didn't recertify on time. And so that's when we then go back to step one and get them reapplied so that they can get their benefits reestablished. But if not, if it doesn't get approved, then you have that additional follow-up to figure out, what's going on there. Any questions about that? I know it seems like a lot, but it's actually, once you get the flow of it, it's a pretty straightforward process. Cool. All right, so operationalizing SNAP and SNAP employment training verification. So I've covered a lot of that already. It's how we do it here at CEO. But these are some things that we want you to consider as a provider on how are you going to implement these processes into your systems. So how are you going to currently track if a participant receives SNAP? And if there's not a way to incorporate the question into your intake process, so how do you figure it out whether they're on SNAP or not? This is really important for you to try to figure that out now, who your population is, as you're thinking about when you're going to apply for an employment and training program. If you decide to move forward with that, you want to know of the population you're serving currently, how many of them are receiving SNAP and who aren't. And then also maybe you can figure out too, well, maybe just because they're not receiving SNAP, are we going to assist them? And what would that number look like then? Because you want to know, who it is that you're serving, and when you're applying for your SNAP E&T program, how they're going to also want to know how many of your participants are you going to enroll in the SNAP E&T program and are going to be eligible. So you want to try to be thinking about that. So also on the flip side, once you get approved, what's that process going to look like when that participant gets referred to you? When are you going to find out whether they're receiving SNAP benefits or not? Is it going to be when you do an outreach phone call to them, or that they contact you, or are you going to do it when they come in and start filling out paperwork or have an orientation session? Because at CEO, we don't serve a participant. We serve the participant regardless of whether they're receiving SNAP or not. And so we generally don't prioritize that component of it as far as assessing whether they're SNAP E&T. But that might be a choice that you're saying we're only going to serve SNAP E&T participants, or we are going to have a mix because we have other funding sources from elsewhere. And so you just need to figure out where it is in that process that you're going to begin tracking that information and capturing that. So if you have a participant that is a great fit for your program, but they're not on SNAP yet, how are you going to orient that change to support them through the SNAP application? So are you going to assist that participant in applying for SNAP benefits? And are you going to see that process through with them? So a prime example, a lot of our participants at CEO struggle with navigating benefits. And they don't understand all of the things that they need to pull together to meet the eligibility requirements. They might not have a cell phone or a way to get in touch with that eligibility worker easily in order to get their appointment and their interview that they have to have in order to get approved. And so you can play an important role as a provider in helping facilitate that and guiding them through that and doing follow-ups to make sure that that process is happening and that you're supporting your participant. So you want to be thinking about how that's going to work within your organization and how you're going to support those participants. The other thing is some programs have like embedded workers in their programs to where they're county agency workers that can come into your office and assist in applications. So you can always look to see if there are other resources that can help with that. A lot of our counties have kind of done away with that process, especially as they're centralizing more of these eligibility processes. But definitely be thinking about working with your county agencies, their E&T workers and their eligibility workers to help facilitate helping your participants because they can be a great resource. And there are also other providers who they assist, not necessarily SNAP E&T providers, but they just assist people in applying for benefits in general. And so you could try to think about networking with them too if that's something that you don't have the capacity for. But there are many options. We always think it's best to try to do it in-house if you can, because you're supporting that participant and you're the one working with them. But there are other options for that as well. So who's going to be responsible for submitting that reverse referral and who's going to track that? So at CEO, that same person who does that initial orientation with that participant and they're determining that SNAP status up front, that's the same person in our organization who is going to then submit that reverse referral to the county. So right after that session, that orientation session, and that participant has deemed that they want to move forward in our program, we'll immediately take all that information, we'll enter it into our own case management system, but within that process, they're going to send that reverse referral off to the county, and then it'll wait for that approval to come back. So you want to be thinking about that in your own organization and how you're going to structure that. And then finally, SNAP participation is just not like a participant receiving SNAP isn't guaranteed month to month to month. So their benefits can lapse. There's recertification periods that they have to adhere to continue having those benefits. And so as a SNAP E&T provider, you need to have that mechanism in place to how do you re-verify that participant is receiving SNAP every single month, because that's going to tell you whether they're eligible to continue billing under that program. If a participant fails to recertify, as an example, and loses benefits, unless they're already in job retention, and that we can talk about that later, but unless they're already in job retention, any other component basically needs to stop at that point, and you're not going to be able to provide services, at least billing it to SNAP. You'd have to then find what other funding streams can you tap into continuing offering that participant services. The exception to that might be if there's a regain process in that state where they can come back and get their benefits reestablished, but that's a pretty complicated process, and a lot of states are participating in that. So. But you want to know how you're going to operationalize that into your processes, rechecking that person's status each month so that you can maintain that eligibility. And that's also a great place if you can figure out where their recertification date is, as an example. Some states provide that to us in that reverse referral. So they'll tell us, yep, they're approved for SNAP E&T. This is when their benefits started. This is their recertification date. It's a great place for you as a case manager to support that participant. You flag that recertification date in your system, and then you're like, hey, we know your recertification is coming up. Do you need any support in making sure that you are getting that turned in on time so that you can help them maintain that eligibility? So again, just something really important there to think about when you're thinking about this in kind of big picture and how you're going to incorporate those SNAP participants into your program. So any questions thus far on that? Okay. Obviously, if you did have any questions, like we're all here standing by, waiting for your questions and happy to assist. So, Riley.
I pretty much just took the words right out of my mouth. Just if there's any of this that is confusing, we can kind of do deep dives in our one-on-ones. So Sam, I might be taking your bit about this, but just wanted to say, similar to how we did the services mapping in our one-on-ones and did a deep dive, we can do that with this topic as well, and really those can't say that word, those discussion questions. We can dive in with you all and really get kind of into the nitty-gritty in your own programs about how you might think through what it would look like to build this into your process. So we'll be right there with you as you think through those questions more deeply.
Thanks, Riley. Thanks, Erin, Gina. So that brings us to the end of our content. I know we're all very, very busy these days. I'm constantly multitasking. So hopefully these slide decks and materials can be also used to look back on with your TA team, like Riley was mentioning. So make sure you're keeping those work plans updated and updated notes. Make sure you're completing the services mapping tool and staff mapping tool, which we'll get to next month. So those will be dropped in your shared folders. You don't have to, that shouldn't say complete up there, not the staff mapping tool, but you can take a peek at it if you want. If not, we'll go through it at our next session. So May 27th should be on your calendars at 2 p.m. EST for our next monthly training, all about organizational capacity and staff mapping. So it'll be kind of an interactive session next month. So hopefully all of you can join us there. And then of course, we also have our cohort landing page, which also contains all of these resources and more, including the recordings of these sessions. And the very end of the slide deck, we also have some additional resources that are not posted on the cohort landing page in case you wanted some material as you are considering onboarding as a provider or applying as a provider. We have a couple of templates, including checklists for orientation, handouts for participants that CEO has drafted, participant FAQs, and more. And then that work requirements, those two documents are also linked here. I would start with the brief. It's much shorter. All right, guys, I'm going to stop recording. Maybe.